Hello everyone, this is the Whisperer Ascendancy, and it is busted. To give a brief summary of why it is busted because mana stacking is busted. You can use instant leech mechanics to instantly restore that mana, and then deal a ton of extra flat damage. And then we have this node, which is increases and reductions to spell damage also apply to attacks at 150% of their value, which we will be abusing with, you can abuse with Indigon, and get 3,000% increased attack damage. So yes, Indigon completely breaks this ascendancy wide open, and a lot of people are going to be trying to build into it. There's going to be a little bit of a rough curve in the early game where your ascendancy doesn't really have a lot of strength, but without further ado, let's talk about the ascendancy and what it has to offer. So the most important nodes of this ascendancy is, for starters, this one. Gain 1 maximum mana per 1 dexterity. This is twice as good as base intelligence scaling, which gives you 1 mana per 2 intelligence. So it's twice as efficient to scale dexterity if you have this node. Then we have this node, which is the other extremely important one. Attack skills have added lightning damage equal to 4% of maximum mana and 50% increased mana cost of skills. This increased mana cost of skills is important because of... No, where are we? Mana-Forged Arrows. Mana-Forged Arrows has supported skills deal 1% more damage with hits per 1 mana cost. So the higher we get the mana cost, the more damage with hits we will do. The next... it also kind of serves as a downside to limit the maximum potential of the build. However, you will see when we get to Indigon later, we even turn that upside into that downside into an upside. So very nice. Wait a little gives us a way of scaling rage on a mana stacker. Generating rage is harder to get on ranged based classes than it used to be. You used to just run a helmet that gave you life regeneration, and then you would run a pair of unique gloves that turned life regeneration into rage, but that combination was nerfed. So this solves that problem if you're looking to scale rage, which is very nice. This node, you're probably going to run early on your mana stacker, but eventually you're going to get enough sources of instant mana leech that you probably don't need Breathe Deep. Especially if you have 30,000 mana, there's no way you can scale your mana flask to be strong enough to restore, do like a meaningful difference to that 30,000 mana amount. So you're going to want to switch to Instant Leech eventually, but it's a decent node in the early game. This is probably your best first lab node because it just gives you 4 minimum frenzy and power charges. Both are useful. Nothing much to say there. This node is equal to roughly 30% more evasion rating, because blind makes it 20% harder for enemies to hit you, and blind makes your evasion rating 20% more effective. Then we add another 50% on top of that, so it's roughly 30%. And this increased effective stealth is actually very useful if you run phase run. If you're running a phase run setup in something like Delve, this build will be very good in Delve. Enemies won't be able to perceive your existence at all while phase run is up. It's worth noting. And of course, we blind enemies on hit, which means we don't have to pick a node anywhere on the tree. Kind of nice. This completely breaks the entire build once you have Indigon. Before you have Indigon, it's not going to be as useful. There's not too many easy ways for you to scale spell damage, at least not that I'm aware of, on the tree where the ranger is. And then we next important node is we have 100% of physical damage is taken from mana before life. This is kind of nice because, generally speaking, physical damage is the hardest to mitigate when you are a ranger. You generally fully invest in evasion, then you have spell suppression, and you have resistances, but at the end of the day, if you get hit by a big enough physical hit, generally from an attack, you just melt. And it's kind of hard to invest in endurance charges, so this is potentially a very good node there. Lastly, we have You Forgotten, which gives you some extra clear. Projectile from Attack's Fork Projectile attacks can fork an additional time. It's also worth noting that forked projectiles can return afterwards if you're running some source of projectile return. So that can give you some extra projectiles. Now, I mentioned Endagon earlier, so I'm going to talk about some synergistic uniques now. So first of all, we have Endagon, and Endagon has this line of 23% increased spell damage for each 200 total mana you have spent recently, up to 2,000%. This is broken because it allows you to scale. It allows you to scale spell damage up to 2,000%, and then since we get 50% more value out of that spell damage and convert it to attack damage, we get 3,000% attack damage in the helm slot. Now, you need a lot of investment to take advantage of that full 3,000, but even if you take advantage of 1/3 of that, right? 1,000% increased attack damage is more attack damage than the majority of builds have in the entire build, and it is in your helmet slot. That is busted. Another thing to consider here is that it causes increased cost of skills for each 200 total mana you've spent recently. This sounds like a big downside, and in a way it is, but because increased cost of skills also increases our Mana Forged Arrow damage, what we do is we grab one source of leech on the tree, or however many sources you need, and then you get this node, which is 10% of leech is instant. So what this will do is, let's say you use a Mana Forged Arrow setup, and it's Blast Rain, and if we look at Blast Rain, Blast Rain fires 6 arrows, and we can also scale additional arrows so it fires more. And when each arrow lands, we will get another source of instant leech. So potentially, once we deal enough damage, and we probably will deal enough damage, each one of those individual hits will be enough to pay for the cost of the hit that triggered it. So we can go mana positive as long as we have enough damage. And that's really what allows Endagon to builds like this to pay that really high Endagon cost. You'd use some sort of multi-hit attack in Mana Forged Arrows, if that wasn't clear. So something like Blast Rain, Mana Forged Arrows, and it's also worth noting that Mana Leech doesn't have a mana multiplier. So if you add that to your setup, you're not increasing the cost of the setup, but you're getting quote-unquote free Damage Leech's mana. You probably won't need too many sources of Mana Leech in your build because your damage will be so high, but it's worth noting. And yeah, that's pretty much it. If you want to see a full path of building for this, I could get one for you guys, but this guy, 1 Mana Left, or Connor Converse, he's going to be creating a video, I imagine, sometime soon. If you check him out on Twitch, he also does, he's been basically theory crafting the build for a long time. I think his path of building is showing like 2.7 billion DPS at the moment with his late game version of the build, which will be expensive, but even the early game version of the build was doing millions and millions. So who cares? You know, it's gonna be a good build. Check this guy out. It's not worth it if I show you a build, because this guy's better at it and he'll probably be able to answer your questions. Have a nice day, YouTube, and good luck.